Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and it's time to put a smile on that face with our breakdown of the 100 best Easter eggs in Batman Begins. Our journey begins with the Batman logo appearing on screen after being formed by a cauldron of bats. Yes, that's the name used to describe a group of them. Anyway, why this is important is because the logo kickstarts every single movie in the trilogy, and with it comes a lot of symbolism and double meaning. Batman Begins is created by bats as these become integral to the entry. The theme of the film is fear and overcoming it, and Bruce at one point throws himself into the midst of them when exploring the cave in order to overcome his fear and thus become the hero that the city needs. The Dark Knight starts off with the symbol flying through a blue fire, and to me this represents how the Joker is someone that wants to watch the world burn, but that Batman will always be there to stop him. The Dark Knight Rises has the symbol created through ice cracking, and a large part of that film takes place in the winter and involves Bane breaking Batman. Cut to a young Bruce taking an arrowhead, and he then falls down a well. This shot would later be echoed in The Dark Knight Rises when Bruce is climbing out of the pit, and symbolically this moment kickstarts a motif that would come full circle in that film. Here, Bruce has to be helped out of it by his father, but come the third film he's able to do it himself, showing that he has been able to rise, pun intended. Now this well is the entrance to the cave, and as we see it's swarming with bats which create nightmares for Bruce and tie back to his fear. The character even wakes up in a prison haunted by these dreams, and we discover that his fear of bats in some ways led to his parents' death. Thus, him confronting bats is also confronting the trauma that has driven him, and it's a nice way of layering everything into one cohesive narrative. When Bruce is listening to his father's heartbeat at one point, we can also see little bat symbols on his sweater, and these would appear as the signal in The Dark Knight Rises, lacing the movie with an even deeper subtext. Not too long after, Bruce meets Ducard and is then released from prison. Ducard is actually a character in the comics that trained Bruce to be a detective, and at the time it was a big twist to learn that he'd actually been Ra's al Ghul the whole time. I know it's typically pronounced Raish, but as they call him Raz, to keep it consistent, I'm just going to call him that throughout the breakdown. He makes a journey across the rocky cavernous icelands, and this location was also echoed in the first Justice League trailer, so we may see something similar in the Snyder Cut when it releases next year. Bruce ends up getting trained by the League of Shadows, who in the comics are called the League of Assassins. Batman of course has a no killing rule, so this was likely changed because the character wouldn't shack up with a bunch of murderous ninjas. Now Bruce is told that theatricality and deception are powerful agents of the League of Shadows. This foreshadows their plan, as they of course want to drug the city into hallucinating their deepest fears so that they can tear themselves apart. The things that they see will not be there in real life, and therefore it will be a deception that preys upon the theatrics that their mind can create in order to take them down. A line that's a play on this of course returns in The Dark Knight Rises, when Bane says theatricality and deception are powerful agents to the uninitiated. This confirms that he was amongst their ranks, and likely trained by Raz himself. Raz also says he wants to restore balance to the world, which Talia also hints towards at the party in The Dark Knight Rises by saying something similar. From here, Bruce slips into a nightmare once more, in which we learn about what drives him. Bruce visits the opera with his parents, and in many ways the performers that he sees inspire his costume. There's a character wearing bat ears that can be seen, and the main costumes that scare Bruce involve performers in black dangling from ropes. Batman of course uses ropes to get around the city, and black cloth to glide. Now the opera itself is called Mephistopheles, which I've definitely pronounced wrong because I sit around watching Batman movies all day instead of going to the opera. But this story actually has several tiebacks to the film itself, and the plot can be seen echoing Bruce's journey. The piece is about the devil trying to corrupt the character Faust into helping him complete his goal. Now if you take this and apply it to the characters in the movie, the devil represents Ra's al Ghul, and Bruce could be seen as a stand-in for Faust. The goal is to destroy Gotham, but much like the story, things don't go the devil's way. Ultimately, Faust turns to God and takes a different path, much like how Bruce turns to Batman, and it's nice that the symbolism is laced highly in the opera. There's also a similar idea of a mortal turning to God at the end of the movie when Raz invades Bruce's home. Bruce says there are good people in Gotham when pleading with the villain not to destroy the city, And in the Bible, Abraham used the same argument when pleading with God not to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was rotten to the core, and much like Raz, God wanted to destroy the city because it was too far gone. I absolutely love these metaphors, and Bruce's parents are killed in front of him by Joe Chill, who also carried out this crime in the comics. There's also the tearing of the pearls, which are infamous throughout Batman's history, and Bruce drops to his knees, which echo the panels from Batman Year 1. His father tells him not to be afraid, and we can also hear a single choir boy singing a note very hauntingly. This single voice of a young boy of course represents Bruce, who is now completely alone in the world. Well, he has Alfred, I suppose, but you know what I mean. Now next we meet Jim Gordon for the first time, and he puts his coat around the boy, which is brought up again at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, so that Batman can reveal his true identity to the character. We also meet Commissioner Loeb, who actually seems like a nice guy, unlike his comic book counterpart in Batman Year 1, who's pretty much helping to cause corruption in the city. Cut back to Bruce sparring with Raz over an iced over lake, and though B-Boy seems to win, Raz takes him out by cracking the ice, which makes him fall through it. This is echoed in The Dark Knight Rises when the prisoners are forced to wander out onto ice and they fall through, which eventually leads to their deaths. Raz says you never learn to mind your surroundings, which pops up again later in the movie with Bruce using his environment to beat the character, similar to what the villain does here. Raz helps Bruce to warm up, and he tells him of his family and how they were taken from him. This of course returns in The Dark Knight Rises when we see the backstory of Talia and how she and her mother were taken from him by a vicious warlord. Now we later see another subtle detail that links the two, and this comes during the scene in which the fake Ra's al Ghul picks up a branding iron. On the end of it, we can make out what seems to be a shark tooth-like mark, and in The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce notices a scar on Talia's back after the two get it on that looks quite similar. Jump to Joe Chill getting murdered by one of Falcone's henchmen, and we see as he's shot outside the courtroom with guards surrounding him. This is actually referencing the infamous image in which Lee Harvey Oswald was assassinated by Jack Ruby. I think Thomas Wayne might have actually been made to look slightly like JFK in order to bring up the similarities with Chill killing a high-ranking member of society before being murdered himself. Probably reaching with that though, but you know, we do like a good reach. Now Rachel takes Bruce downtown and says things are worse than ever, which is a line that reappears in The Dark Knight at the press conference when Harvey claims to be Batman. Bruce ends up leaving and he throws the gun away that he was going to use on Chill, showing that he won't be part of this cycle of violence and eye for an eye mentality. He swaps his coat with a homeless man, and hey, you know what? That is a nice coat. This character appears later in the movie when he just so happens to be standing in pretty much the exact same place that he has for all these years. No, but why this is important is because metaphorically, Bruce getting rid of his coat is also symbolic of him getting rid of his Bruce Wayne identity so that he can go off and carve out a new one. Bruce actually keeps this homeless guy's coat for a while, and we can see it being worn with the sleeves torn off when he steals in order to feed himself. Bruce ends up destroying the League of Shadow base, and because Raz is unconscious during this, he doesn't know what happened to him, so believes that Bruce left him for dead, even though that guy promised him he'd tell him that he saved his life. I don't know if I'm reading into that, but Raz does later say that he left him for dead, so I'm sorry guy, you had one job and you messed it up. Now Bruce comes back to Gotham and we also meet Jonathan Crane, who we discover is the Scarecrow. Similar to Bruce, he uses a mask to drive fear into people, but unlike everyone's favourite Wayne, he does it for personal gain rather than for others. This is Victor Zsasz' court hearing, and you may know this character as the infamous serial killer in the Batman universe. Zsasz also appeared in Birds of Prey, but both of these versions are sort of toned down from what's in the comics. Now in the source material, every time Zsasz kills someone, he cuts his skin to leave a scar, and we can actually see them along his neck just above his shirt. Joker too used scars as a symbol of trauma in The Dark Knight, so it may even be possible that Zsasz inspired the interpretation that Nolan took towards the clown. Cut to Wayne Tower, and we get to meet several of the board members who actually return throughout the trilogy. You also meet Lucius Fox, and are introduced to the armory that Bane would later rob in Rises. The camouflage tumbler is also shown here, which appears in that film, and due to the colours used on it, it's likely that it was part of the Iraq War. We discover that Batman's body armour was deemed too expensive for soldiers, and thus there is very much this idea of it all being linked to that real-world conflict. The Taliban were also trained by the CIA in the 80s, and they took this knowledge and used it against the West, much like how Bane took the weapons that Batman used to protect the city and turned them against it. The League of Shadows are of course situated in the East, and whilst this may be a reach, there are many callbacks. I did tell you it would be a reach, didn't I? Now, why this is interesting is because there exists a theory that the Joker was actually an Iraq War vet who suffered PTSD, and using his military training, he decided to destabilize Gotham. The Dark Knight is often seen as a metaphor for the time period due to the surveillance protocols that Batman carries out to spy on the Gotham citizens. Bush and the CIA were accused of doing this as well, so potentially we have all three films tying back to the war in some interesting ways. Not long after, we're taken to the Batcave and see Bruce putting the foundations in. This would of course become advanced in the third film of the trilogy, but there are some notable aspects of dialogue here. Alfred says the caverns were used by his ancestors to help slaves move as part of the Underground Railroad, and this very much echoes how Bruce's father tried to build an actual railroad to unite the city. Bruce also spray paints the suit with black latex paint, and this is actually capable of hiding the heat signature from things so that it would keep him invisible to infrared. Shortly after, we meet back up with Gordon, who as we see has been partnered up with Detective Flass. In the book Year 1, this was also the case, and similar to what we see here, the character was very crooked and corrupt. Bruce goes to Gordon and holds a stapler to his head in order to make him think he has a gun, and he ends up having to dive off the rooftop of the GCPD, which goes badly, so he has to don a cape. I always thought this costume here was kind of similar to what he had in the animated movie Mask of the Phantasm when going out on his first night, but again, I don't know if I'm reaching yet. Tell me if I am. Now, the mask he wears also appears in The Dark Knight Rises when Bruce visits Gordon in the hospital, and it's a nice little callback to this moment that brings everything full circle. Bruce confronts Falcone down at the dock area again, but this time he's completely transformed. I love how Falcone was both his last criminal interaction in the city and also his first, and yet this scene is just absolutely amazing. Nolan shoots it from the perspective of the criminals, and we really see that Batman becomes a monster in the mind of his enemies. Now, I'm Batman has been said so many times by so many people, a lot better than I have, over the years, that it's almost a running gag at this point, and it's something that Matt Reeves actually played with in the trailer for his upcoming Robert Pattinson movie. In that, he has the character say that he's vengeance, instead of what we all suspected, but hey, I still like saying, I'm Batman. Now, Batman puts Falcone on his spotlight, and this creates the bat symbol for the first time, but it also has another meaning. Falcone is publicly crucified for all in the city to see, whilst we get the idea that Batman will be watching over them. The night goes well, but Alfred doesn't seem too impressed, and the next day he tells Bruce that he has to play up being a playboy in order to avoid suspicion. His list of things to do include driving sports cars, something that we see him doing that night, dating movie stars, which he also does later that night, and lastly, buying things that aren't for sale, which the character does when purchasing the hotel so that his chums can play in the fountain. The sports car Bruce drives is also the Lamborghini Murcielago, which is Spanish for bat. Batman then goes to Flass and pulls him up using his grappling gun so that the character is face to face with him. This shot would later be echoed at the end of The Dark Knight with the Joker, and it shows that Flass and Batman have opposing ideologies. Bats are also infamous for hanging upside down, so I like how Bruce has used this to strike fear into his enemies. Batman also comes face to face with Joffrey, and I don't care about this no killing rule yet. Just get him while you still can, get him while he's young. If you could, would you go back in time and kill Joffrey as a kid? Because I would. Anyway, off topic. There's also this idea of the drugs being moved through rabbits and bears. Rabbits are actually important as they're symbolic of Alice in Wonderland, which involves hallucinations and weird things being seen. Though the Mad Hatter isn't in this trilogy, similar to the Scarecrow, he uses techniques to make people see things that aren't there, and thus I think this rabbit inclusion and the similarities of the character are done on purpose as a little nod to him. Now that might be a reach, but I tell you what isn't a reach, you reaching for that subscribe button and also clicking the thumbs up. We do videos like this each and every day, so if you're enjoying this, then I thought I'd drop a reminder here. You know, doing the casual, begging people to subscribe stuff never goes down well, but hopefully it does here, and you know I love you. Anyway, Batman is sprayed with Caine's fear toxin, and he begins to imagine bats crawling out of the character's mouth, showing that Bruce is still subconsciously scared of them. Batman gets set on fire and has to be rescued by Alfred, which mirrors how the mansion is set on fire after he's saved by the butler. Now Rachel meets with Caine and he discusses how scarecrows are pillars of fear. This is true, and though not typically used to scare away bats, in general scarecrows are used to drive fear into birds so that they don't land in fields. Caine drugs Rachel and actually gets a taste of his own medicine when Batman turns the toxin on him. We see how Batman is viewed in the eyes of his enemies, and it's one of my favourite scenes in the entire movie. Batman has come full circle and now represents the fear-inducing monster that he believed the bats to be. The GCPD swarm the building and Batman calls him back up, namely bats, which the character also did to escape the police in the graphic novel Year One. Batman races through the streets and rooftops on the Tumbler, and I had this scene ruined for me, so I'm going to do the same for you. Now, one of the cops on the car park roof who tells Bruce to stop actually reappears as the policeman questioning what the vehicle looks like, which he shouldn't have as he was on the rooftop and he already knew. And you know what, I'm really glad I've just spoiled that for you, because you suck. Unless you hit the subscribe button, in which case I love you. Now Bruce returns to his birthday party and we see as Raz uses another stand-in to trick him. This character wears a green coat, which is similar to what the real one does in the comics. Raz hints to Ra's al Ghul being immortal, and though in the film this is merely theatricality and deception, in the comics it goes far beyond that. The source material has Raz using Lazarus pits, which are basically the fountain of youth to keep him young, so it's nice that they grounded it here with the idea that he's only immortal due to his tricks. Bruce actually ruins his reputation in order to save the people at the party, and he ends up taking the blame in order to cover up the truth of what's happening. The character would do something similar at the end of The Dark Knight to stop the truth about Harvey Dent from destroying the city, and I love how he's always willing to throw himself under the bus. He also says that it's not a joke and calls them two-faced friends, and both the Joker and Two-Face appear as villains in The Dark Knight, so this is a good bit of foreshadowing and also a good bit of reaching, yeah, you know I love it. What's interesting is that Raz in some ways caused the Waynes to be killed, but the movie doesn't force it down our throats, and the connection is only there if you want it to be. Raz spreads fear throughout the city, and I think that everyone's lucky no one turned on a kettle for months, as had they done it, they would have breathed in the gas, which, yeah, this is just a bit of a plot hole, isn't it? Now the Narrows are completely bombarded and Scarecrow arrives on a horse. This is actually a callback to when the character did something similar in the graphic novel The Long Halloween. He utters the line "there's nothing to fear but fear itself," which is a callback to when FDR said it in 1933. Batman fights Raz on the train which is heading towards the water main, and this battle is symbolic as he's facing off against his somewhat surrogate father on the thing his real father built. Raz also says "don't be afraid, Bruce," which is the last thing that Thomas said to the character before passing away. Bruce destroys carriages on the train in a weird fashion, but this is actually done on purpose so that his cape can catch the wind and allow him to glide out of there. Now in crashing the train, Bruce destroys his surrogate dad along with his real dad's legacy all in one fell swoop. He has finally become his own man without the need for their guidance, and he triumphantly flies over the city. He does this in front of Wayne Tower, showing how both Wayne and Batman are one and the same, and it's a nice little marriage of the two personas. Bruce forcing an Al Ghul in a vehicle to go tumbling over the edge of something before they die is also the same thing that happens to Talia in The Dark Knight Rises, and even the music is the same for both their deaths as they go over the edge. The movie has a touching scene between Rachel and Bruce, in which he says that the mask he wears now is his true face, and this is actually something that a lot of people have tackled with over the years. I've always viewed Bruce as the mask, and she promises to love him again when he finally comes back, which is something that The Dark Knight tackles. Cut to the bat symbol being made, and Bruce meets Gordon on the roof, which is where we get a tease of the Joker. The calling card is actually written up by Officer J. Kerr, which is of course an alias of the character. Gordon goes to thank Batman, but the Dark Knight says he'll never have to. But I tell you who does need a thank you, me, for doing this video. So if you enjoyed it, then please drop a thumbs up and make sure you check out our full breakdown of Avengers Endgame, which will be linked at the end. We go over the 200 best Easter eggs in the movie, so it's definitely worth checking out if you want to know more. If you want to support the channel and get to see content early, then please consider clicking the join button below. You can also come chat with us on a Discord server, linked in the description, or Heavy Spoilers on Twitter. Thanks for making it until the end of the video. You've been the best. I've been Paul, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.